Hi, I am Jennifer Purcell, and welcome to my podcast, Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, where we will discuss, discover, and learn more about the challenges and triumphs of those with NLD and other learning challenges. I do have a website for this podcast, and it is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter account for the podcast. They are all under the same name, which is Living with NLD. I also have a YouTube channel for the podcast, which can be found by Googling the title of the podcast, which is Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. I would like to tell you about a nonprofit that I use for my research for this podcast. It is called the NVLD Project, and I use their blog for my research. They are a nonprofit that is based in New York and is trying to get NVLD back on the DSM, and they provide many resources for people with NVLD on their website. I'll provide you with the website for them in the podcast description. All proceeds from the ads on this podcast will be donated towards the NVLD project. Please feel free to explore the other topics on the podcast, and hopefully you will learn something new from them. I hope you enjoy today's episodes.
To cope with those challenges, although sometimes it does. Sometimes when something is so hard, our brain, it's not that our brain shuts down, is that we become emotionally exhausted and so psychologically taxed that we kind of do disengage. And there's a strong correlation between learning challenges, so cognitive, let's call them cognitive challenges, because it's not about a label or a diagnosis, but there's a strong correlation between certain cognitive challenges and our mental health, because it all happens in our brain. It's our brains that are constantly asked to problem solve and to develop resilience and perseverance and self-concept, our sense of ourselves. So there's a strong relationship between cognitive challenges and, for example, anxiety and depression. And what's been very beautiful and kind of poignant to see is when someone improves their cognitive profile, when someone engages in a cognitive program that's targets and strengthens some of these cognitive functions, their mental health improves. Sometimes just by virtue of having a more positive experience in life because they're not struggling. And sometimes it's because there's specific cognitive functions that are responsible for things like reflection and things like being able to generate new ideas. So like problem solving. And if you don't, if you strengthen your ability to reflect on something, or even to perceive a certain behavior in yourself or others and interpret it properly, those are cognitive functions, the world settles. And we've seen even changes in people's ability to engage in therapy with greater success. Even I talked about accelerating your academic learning, students who accelerate their academic skill acquisition because of cognitive programming. Same idea with therapeutic approaches. If your brain is stronger, you are better able to access therapy and make gains through therapy. So I think, as you say, adulting, as they say, adulthood is pretty complicated. It's kind of the most complicated course you'll take, right? If you talk about the subject of life, or the degree, diploma in life, school of life, bingo, Jennifer. So that's, and there's no syllabus. There's no, there's no rule book. There's no right answer. There's just this constant navigation of a pretty complex world and beautiful world. There's beauty in the complexity. And the stronger our brains to engage and understand the world and understand ourselves, what a ride.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a really fascinating world. And the more we understand it, and the world's inside this beautiful 3-pound organ we have in our skulls, yeah, such a fascinating topic, and so happy to talk to you about it, Jennifer. It's really, really exciting to think about just like the oodles of potential that we all
Mm-hmm.
have, whatever our diagnosis, whatever our cognitive challenge, whatever our cognitive profile, just lots of possibility. And that might be, if there's one takeaway I would
Mm-hmm.
love your audience to get from our chat is to move, if they are sitting in this idea of I am this, or
Mm-hmm.
my sibling is this, like this
Mm-hmm.
singular definition of X, whatever that X is, if they, from that fixed view to a growth mindset, to potential, move from, and I think you've already done that, Jennifer, when you mentioned, the work that you did to identify a meaningful title for your podcast. What you were doing was moving from this deficit model to this potential model, to this fixed mindset, to this growth mindset. And that's, I think, what today is about, what your podcast is about, and certainly the work that we do at Arrowsmith is all about.
Yeah, I agree with you on that because, and thank you for saying that. One of again, you bring up another topic I did of growth mindset, fixed mindset of where um one of the things that reminds me of when I was this goes back when I in the first year of when I was working on the podcast.
Mm.
My brother, as a Christmas gift, he got me a course on podcasting. And at
Mm.
that point, I think I had done maybe 10 or 12 episodes. I forget how many.
Okay.
And I thought I had the kind of the hang of it or the grasp of it. And I thought, well, why do I need this course? I had a fixed
Oh,
mindset.
interesting.
And so I was like, well, you know, maybe I should just take a look at it and see if I learn anything and see if you know, if there's anything that will come from it.
Uh-huh.
And I'm glad I did because when I took it, I realized my episodes were a little too short because at that point they were about 15 minutes or 10 minutes, not 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them were the audio quality wasn't good because I didn't have a great microphone at the time. I was just using
Mm-hmm.
the microphone in my computer or
Mm-hmm.
and one in headphones that weren't very good. Um, and so I was like, well, okay, I have this dilemma, if you will. Do I go back and redo all those episodes I did, or do I get better at the future ones?
Oh my
And
gosh.
so
Jennifer, it's like, yeah,
I
what
I'll tell you what I
insight,
did.
right?
Yeah. So I challenged myself. I went back and re-recorded those episodes that I did in the beginning because I wanted to get better at them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I told my audience I did it. I so instead of doing one episode each Friday, I did two episodes. I would do a new one and then I would go back and do an old one.
Uh-huh.
And so
I'm trying to be so patient, waiting for you to finish, but I
that's
really,
okay. Go
it's
ahead.
so compelling, Jennifer, to hear that choice you made. Like, you made
Mhm.
a choice there. You could be limited by you could hide from the opportunity to learn and grow,
Mm-hmm.
or you could take the challenge. You could accept that gift from literally a gift from your brother, the gift
Right.
of the course and the gift of saying, "Hey, Jennifer, do you want to get even better? Do you want to improve?"
Mm-hmm.
It's that's the growth mindset. That's what life is all about. That's what learning is all about. That's what a neuroplastic or cognitive lens is all about. Is
Mm-hmm.
this is where we are right now, and it's like the universe and science gives you this chance, and you want to have an even deeper, more meaningful experience. Do you want to have even greater potential? Do you want to move forward and in and deeper and more connected with others and contribute more? That's
Mm-hmm.
the growth mindset. And it's what a beautiful example of, like, figuratively and literally,
Yeah.
the gift of a growth mindset. And to be clear, you mentioned it, when your brother gave you that gift, you're like, well, I've already done 10. Why do I need? It can sting.
Exactly.
It can sting to be reminded that, okay, that's a good start. And what's next?
Mm-hmm.
And we have an entire system, never mind educational system, but like our human system is built on, it's achievement oriented, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's A+ oriented,
Mm-hmm.
not the journey of it. And what does it take to get to that A+? And it can sting, but it's so important. I'm in Toronto. I'm in Canada. We're all about winter here right now, and we're skating. And my
Uh-huh.
kids are falling when they skate. And they are so
Uh,
bored with me saying falling is part of learning, because that's
right.
our mantra. And it's it's again literal and figurative. Yes, they are
It is,
literally
yeah.
falling on the ice when they're trying to learn how to skate backwards or do a turn, or with a move with their hockey stick and puck. And
Right.
that's life. Falling in life is
Yeah.
part of learning, and every time we fall, we learn something, and our
Yeah.
brains need to fail and get up again, literally and figuratively, and
Mm-hmm.
try again. That's growth mindset. Not yet, not yet. And
Right.
I love that example, Jennifer, of your brother, whether he knew he was giving you that
Mm-hmm.
gift to keep growing, but you really took up the challenge and went with it. So well done.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that example too because it it's a good way to showcase how I used to um think about the podcast or about other things and be like I know for me another quick example of like a fixed mindset of realizing um how you mentioned earlier of somebody not being a math person.
Mm,
Um, I
mm-hmm.
know for me, or not being a writing person, when I was in school, and this is before I had my diagnosis, I had tutors for writing and for math. And when they would help me with my homework, um, sometimes I would get so frustrated because it took me a very long time to understand whatever we were working on. And I would sometimes I would cry or just get very frustrated and I'd be like, you know, when is this going to be easier, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually on days when it did get a little bit easier,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "Oh, okay. This is what it feels like for it to
Mm-hmm.
be just, this much easier." Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I enjoyed that. And I was like, okay, yes, I can do math in my head. Yes, I
Mm-hmm.
have to work at doing it in my head more. than some people might, but it's rewarding when you get to that point of, okay, um, this is easier for me than it used to be, whatever it might be. Um, so I think that's a good thing.
Well, Jennifer, what again, you're making this conversation so uh, easy for me in a way, because what you're naming are literally these conditions of neuroplastic change. So when you
Hmm.
talk about something being, you being engaged enough that something that was hard yesterday has become easy now, that's part of our brain's growth and improvement. So
Hmm.
there's these scientific principles that we know, and actually the founder of my program, Barbara Arrowsmith Young, was instrumental in this field of neuroplasticity and has been called a pioneer in this field of neuroplasticity because her work really has shaped our understanding, our
Hmm.
global understanding of how to improve our cognitive function. And there are these principles or conditions of neuroplastic change. And one of them is making sure that our brain is kind of working, what we call effortful processing. So we have to, our brain, our cognitive function has to be taxed enough that it's kind of trying, because if it's too easy, there's no growth, right? If we're just
Hmm.
like on autopilot, there's no growth happening. And if it's too hard, we can't, there's no stimulation, there's no activity because it's just too challenging. So we kind of disengage. So within a really effective cognitive program, we have to be engaged in something that's just, it's achievable, right? It's not so challenging that it's not achievable. It's not too easy that it doesn't require any effort, but that it's incrementally challenging and just above our current function. And then when that's easy, when we've mastered that, we're going to make it a little more complicated or a little more challenging. And
Hmm.
each stage of that process is actually targeting and strengthening our brains. Think about. I'm always careful because our brain is not a muscle, so it's not like going to the gym, because
Right.
our brains are used in everyday intellectual activity, so they never atrophy. But when we go to the gym or train for a sport, at first it all feels hard. So we just have to start, with 1 pound or 2 pounds. And when that's easy,
Hmm.
we increase the challenge. So what you've described is, kind of literally a neuroplastic activity. And I so admire you for going through that process and doing it largely independently. I will say, as I mentioned, you're a rarity. You're the exception. Uh, there are schools around the world or organizations around the world that offer the Arrowsmith Cognitive Program, and it's a system of these exercises and what we call an ecosystem of these exercises. Because the reality is, I'm not. I don't think it's reasonable for everyone to do what you've done. It's incredible what you've done. Uh, and for the average person to have a cognitive program that's actually designed to support them in a really specific, intentional, individualized program of brain strengthening will lead to some really compelling results for them. What's nice about advances, not just in science, but also in technology, is these programs are also available online. So people
Hmm.
can do a cognitive program, an Arrowsmith program from home. There's still the role of a facilitator. That's something that's
Hmm.
part of our particular program, a teacher or a facilitator, a coach, really, that makes sure that folks are on track and on target, particularly for children who really benefit from that connection, but even for all of
Of
us
course.
to have someone that's really looking out for us and analyzing the data to make sure that these programs are doing what they're designed to do. But gosh, it's so neat to hear that you've almost naturally identified some of these conditions. There's lots, by the way, if your audience is interested in these conditions or principles of neuroplastic change, lots of information I can share that if they're interested in the science behind it.
Yeah, I think they would be, and I want to thank you for bringing up the exception based piece, because I know from interviewing other people on this podcast that I am the exception of, how you said, of having the tenacity and the persistence to work at something, because I can remember somebody I interviewed, I think this was a couple years ago. He um, didn't have quite the support system I have. Of
Mm,
He was more on his own of working on his challenges,
mm,
and I can only imagine what that would be like.
mm.
Um, and so, and I'm sure there are other people like that too. And so, um, that's why I think it's good for, resources like Arrowsmith to be out there, or my podcast, or books, or
Mm-hmm,
whatever they may be,
mm-hmm,
because not everybody, unfortunately, not everybody has a supportive family or friends or
mm-hmm.
teachers or whatever that they need um, for working on the neurodiversity aspect.
It's true, and there's been, I think, a lot of great work in the fields, but there's still, yeah, there's still a lot of work
Improve.
to be done. Yeah, and you mentioned, resources that might be helpful. Another great one, not necessarily focused on neurodiversity, but focused on math, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is um, is a kind of an interesting field, because that tends to be a really common, like the word people who like math and people who don't. And there's a book called Limitless Mind. It's
Mm.
by a Stanford professor, Joe Bowler, and that's really speaks to a lot of some of the concepts we've talked about today, like growth mindset, like not yet, and
Mm-hmm.
the field of math, which again tends to be one of these areas that people either uh, are comfortable in or avoid entirely. And her work at Stanford, and in this book, and she actually has she's done a lot of really, really important work in moving the field of learning forward,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, addressing some of these pieces we've talked about today, like stigma, like what does it mean to struggle with learning, like what is the value in just seeing ourselves as where we are right now, and not as a deficit, but as potential.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a few resources, and I'll send them your way, Jennifer, so you can share them with your audience. But um, yeah, I feel like there's a lot of different paths we can take in terms of different things we can chat about, because yeah, we all have a brain, and there's probably nothing as quite as universal and equalizing as our brains.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I think one of the other questions I had was, and we've touched upon some of this already, of we've been talking a lot about misconceptions, but what
Mm.
do you think are some common misconceptions about the potential and capabilities of people with learning disabilities? I know that's a mouthful.
Well, no, I mean it is wide.
Hmm.
It is wide, and uh, it is risky, because it does tend to. I think there's two sides of it. There's internal and external.
Mm-hmm.
There's how we see ourselves and how others see us. There's
Right.
the degree to which we have an internal locus of control. In other words, that we understand that we have play a big role in
Mm.
how we engage and interact and navigate the world, versus
Mm-hmm.
the feeling that everything happens to us, and therefore we are limited in how much we can influence. So it's kind of a big, it's I mean, maybe I'd love to hear from you, actually, given your
Okay.
experience. Where do you think the focus and the attention should best be placed?
Um, I was just rereading the question myself. So, common misconceptions about the potential and capabilities of people with learning disabilities. Um,
In your
I think,
experience.
yeah, I think we were kind of getting at this earlier when we were talking about um the not yet piece
Mm,
because of how, like, a good example for me of something I really worked on was learning how to drive.
mm,
And so that brings up for me the visual spatial concept of, you know, for me, my challenge, and this is probably true for others as well, judging distances between objects is mainly my challenge in that area. Um,
specific cognitive function. Yeah, go
yeah,
on.
and multitasking, and also slower reflexes, and reminding myself of the many different tasks you have to do when you're driving or anything
Mm-hmm,
that is multitasking.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And so when I was learning how to do that, I started when I was 17 and a half. And my dad and my mom taught me, and they were very good teachers. But unfortunately, I didn't really get enough practice to get my license when I was 18,
mm-hmm,
before college. Um, but then when I went to college in the Bay Area, so I didn't really need a car up there because they have great public transportation.
mm-hmm,
So I didn't go back or return to driving until I graduated at age 22. And by that point, I was like, I feel like I'm starting all over.
mm-hmm.
So I knew that I wasn't there yet of having that skill of driving, but I was like, okay, well, I remember a little bit from beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not completely at the start back at the starting point, but um in between, I guess. So long story short, I did s- practice more and I did get my license, but um it's still challenging for me because not just because of NLD, but because of having chronic migraines. And so
Mm,
I can't always drive because of
mm,
being in pain.
mm,
And, for me, either physical pain or just feeling like you can't trust yourself
mhm,
of
mhm,
going somewhere that
mm,
you might not have been to before with
mhm,
driving or with
mhm,
walking, whatever mode of
mhm,
transportation.
mhm,
Um, And it's like, okay, yes, that might be true, but you have to get back on the horse sometime
mm.
and be able to realize, okay, yes, I can do this. Um, it just is gonna be it's gonna take a little longer.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
um, so I did work at that, and actually a couple weeks ago I had a driving lesson with an instructor because I hadn't been haven't been driving for over a year
Mhm,
consistently.
mhm,
And I'm so glad I had that lesson because it was reinforcing of me for me, I am a good driver. I
mhm,
just need to do it more so I can see that in myself
Mm-hmm.
and realize, yes, I can check my mirrors or scan when I need to. I know
Mm-hmm.
how to do that. Um, I'm getting better at stopping sooner for red lights and yellow lights
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it goes back to that misconception of not yet.
Yeah, I think listening to you, Jennifer, and being reminded again the complexities of adult life, like driving, it's an
Mhm.
incredibly complex intellectual task. Never mind the, uh, the psychological. It's funny you mentioned driving. There's this highway,
Mhm.
Jennifer, for any of your listeners in Canada or who have visited Toronto or the Greater Toronto area, there is a road called the 401. And I believe
Okay.
at some points there are 8 lanes,
Oh
four
boy.
going this way, four going that way, going 70 miles an hour.
Mhm.
Uh, and I find it terrifying. And I've been driving for decades, and I still find it terrifying because of all what can go wrong. I'm amazed that more
Mhm.
doesn't go wrong. But whenever I'm on that road, I am reminded of the incredible intellectual complexity of.
Hopefully what you can do with these episodes on this podcast, Living with Invisible Learning Challenge, I would like to challenge you to journal about the episodes and just see what you learn from them. Or you can share about the episodes with your friends and family and see what they can learn from them. And as always, I will post the links to the articles that I use in the description of the podcast. And please let me know if you know somebody who you think would want to be interviewed on this podcast, or if you yourself would want to be interviewed. Please email me. I have my email on my website, and I also have it pretty much pretty accessible on Facebook and Instagram through messaging as well. So you can get in contact with me in those ways.